justice. She is an amazing individual. I've had the pleasure of working with her for several years in different capacities. Now we find ourselves in N50 continuing that effort. Dr. Kiesha King is the Senior National Education Administrator for T-Mobile, which I think is a fancy way of saying you are counted on and depended upon by T-Mobile for almost everything education, including the Project 10 Million project, right?
Yeah, and higher education.
And higher education, yes, thank you. Kiesha, I went back and I looked at your LinkedIn profile, which I actually haven't done for years and years, right? But I thought, let me just go see what's here. And of course, I noticed the long list of prestigious awards, right? The FCC Digital Equity Award, the Responsible 100 Award, the National Trio Achievers Award, among several others that would take too long to go through. It seems like every time I turn around, you're somewhere accepting an award and speaking on behalf of T-Mobile in the program.
Yeah, you know what? It's I always like to say I never accept an award for myself. It's either for my team or my family and the sacrifices that they make so that I can be where I need to be. And so thank you for the recognition. I appreciate it.
Well, that's a great segue, because I noticed in your profile, square in the middle of all of those things that describe who you are is this term kid servant. And I thought, how appropriate. You've spent more than 13 years in K-12 specifically, but you continue that work on today at T-Mobile, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny. When I started off working with kiddos, I was like 14 years old, and I had got a internship at a child development center at a hospital, and just really worked from there. And I always told myself, I never want to be a teacher because you have to make kids sit still. And then when I became a teacher, I was the teacher where, people would come in and say, do they really have to stand on the desk to learn about inferencing? And I'm like, yes, they do. And so we always had so much fun, and it's just spurred on a career of that I wake up every day and I'm excited to do the work. I'm excited to advocate for kiddos and have conversations about, how we can do our best as adults to serve them.
Yeah, you pour yourself into this work for sure. I also noticed that we have an interesting statistic, for me at least, almost 400 mutual connections on LinkedIn. That's how close we've traveled in our time, working in K-12 in Texas, and now beyond into this work. That's very interesting.
Who cares about 5 degrees of separation when you have 400?
If you know Kiesha, you know everybody, right?
I love it. No, it's been amazing, and you've been such an amazing just partner and thought partner over the years. So I appreciate it.
Well, I hope we have a chance to sort of explore some of those stories today for folks, and maybe set the tone a little bit for what we're trying to accomplish. Now, this is a regular N50 partner meeting. I say regular, this is our regularly scheduled event, but of course it's a completely different format where our partners engage and we try to bring these great opportunities to them in the spirit of Digital Inclusion Week. I know that you, as you've already described, your spirit with education and so forth, we want to invite and encourage people to participate in this session. We'll try to provide engaging stories, but we're going to welcome questions and comments as we go along. We have plenty of time, right? So we'll try not to race through any of the good stuff that's here. As Erin mentioned at the start, she calls me the keeper of the phrase "what if," and I always say, well, it's actually 4 words, right? My 4 favorite words are "what if" and "so that." So what if we did X so that communities could gain Y out of it? And so that's kind of the spirit I'm hoping we can, go through some of the information today, and some of the conversation is around that what if and so that. T-Mobile did a big what if, right? With Project 10 Million, and then the deeper dive into education as well. Can you just give everyone who's maybe not familiar with that very well-known program maybe some insight into that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Kevin, when I came into T-Mobile, we had served about maybe 15,000 students, right? And T-Mobile was really just trying to find their way in the education space, and knew they wanted to do something super impactful. And I was one of T-Mobile's first education customers as in Aldine ISD, a district of 70,000 students, 96% free and reduced lunch. I was building up their virtual school programs and really talking about how we wanted to look at device integration and doing a bunch of fun stuff. A lot of people remember 2012, our emphasis on all of our wireless access points and our infrastructure, and just trying to make sure that we're working with great partners to diversify the way we teach and learn, right? And so coming from that, and then kind of making this transition into T-Mobile, in between there, I was consulting all over the country. So I found myself building virtual learning programs in, Alameda County Office of Education, California Department of Education, and all these other places. And that was really fun work. But coming into T-Mobile was quite the challenge, right? And trying to figure out, right, like, what if we're able to really do something amazing here? And we've since connected over 4.3 million students, and I built up
Wow.
a team, right? It's been phenomenal. And I built up a team of these amazing education professionals from all over the country. You know, I brought in the former CIO of Penn State University. I brought in the former education advisor to the governor of the state of Idaho, and the former Nation's Report Card administrator, and then College Board's executive director. So I have this like slew of different types of talent, and of course, an amazing principal from an inner city school. And so bringing those folks together and then saying, you know what, let's make a commitment to the country to do something that no one has ever done. And T-Mobile just has invested $10.7 billion into providing no-cost internet access for K-12 students across the country. That means that any K-12 student can literally go to tmobile.com/project10million or P10M, however you want to shorten it. They can enter in a little bit of information, their, you know, what school district they're in, their ID number, of course, nothing that, you know, violates their privacy. And we mail a hotspot directly to their house that has 5 years of internet access, 100 gigs of access per year. And that is available for every single K-12 student household that qualifies for National School Lunch Program. So you think about $10.7 billion, that's a huge commitment and a huge investment. We have about 2.5 more years left to the program. And so it does put me in a position to start asking, number one, what do we do next? Right. And I was thinking that on day one, before we even launched, like, what do we do next? What if we do something even bigger next? I don't know. But you know, the next thing that it begs me to question is, how can we use this commitment as something that bridges something even bigger? Right. So when I'm talking to universities, how do I say, you know, how can we use Project 10 Million to impact your pipeline? Right? How can we use that to impact your recruitment and retention efforts? How can we now leverage Project 10 Million with programs like TRIO or like Student Success? Or, you know, there's so many other programs out there that rely on internet access in order to provide, you know, these opportunities for kiddos. And then, of course, digging deeper at the school district side of the house, Kevin, because when you connect 4.3 million students, you have a lot of questions about adoption. And I know that's, you know, something that was just mentioned. Inclusion is great, but what is inclusion without adoption, right? And we were in a position to have to do something really quick in the pandemic. And so I know you and I will get into that a little more.
Well, we have to, yeah.
That's the fun part, right? Like, because now we're in this morphing place where when you start talking about virtual learning, online learning, even connectivity in traditional school systems, sometimes it sounds anti-teacher or anti-classroom.
Right.
Right. And so we have to be very careful about the way that we frame that, even in how we're talking about the way that our businesses work, right? And how we want to layer our businesses into the education space. So I hope that answered the question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Without jumping too far ahead, right? You know, talking about the pandemic just a little bit.
Yeah.
And I know, you know, Aaron and I were on the, in the seats in the schools, right? When the pandemic hit. And our biggest concern was that all that we hoped for in terms of remote learning, hybrid learning, student agency, that somehow all that would be evaluated based on what was really emergency online learning, without training, without setup, and so forth. And so you touched on that. It's like this was interesting how we gained access for a lot of students. Like there's a clear gain right there. Students gained access during the pandemic, but did they really gain what it takes to adopt it in an education sense, or did communities gain it in the way that they really needed to have it be more sustainable? And so thinking about that in terms of N50, the heart and soul of N50 is really about adoption. I mean, you can't do adoption if you don't have access, right? So that's there, but it's all really about adoption. What did you see during the pandemic that was in that frame of changes for adoption?
You know what? Education has always made database decisions. And you know that, Kevin, we put together our strategic plans, and we have our measurable outcomes and our KPIs, and we kind of plan around that, whether it is from an academic perspective, or it's student attendance or behavior, or, you know, how many students are involved in different activities or engaged in certain programs, graduation rates, you know, all types of things we're looking at from a data-based, you know, decision-making perspective. And as a result of this global pandemic and this rush to be reactionary and try to make sure kids at least have the right to education, which they could only have if they had access, we now, you know, we're funneling billions of dollars, and we still are, into keeping students connected and providing, right, these inclusive opportunities for students to still learn in a diverse environment. Well, what's happening is we have a lot of school district leaders now saying, well, we need to get kids back in the classroom, right? And so connectivity and digital inclusion and all these, you know, amazing things that we needed during the pandemic, we don't know if we necessarily need that. And so they're starting to kind of abandon this philosophy that students are going to be a part of a future that really they haven't been exposed to if we don't keep the technology in their hands. Yeah. Right. And so now the conversations are really shifting. And my question for school districts all over the country has been, you know, we went in asking the question, who needs the internet? Right. We said, do you have internet at home? Okay, well, if you don't, here's a hotspot. Right. And that's really, number one, it's not an inclusive way to ask the question, because we know students who really are marginalized and our opportunity youth, they a lot of times aren't sitting at home. They're highly mobile, highly transitional, right? And so they're on the side of the soccer field. They're waiting for mom to get off of work in front of Walmart. They're, you know, on public transportation. They're at grandma's or grandpa's house, or, you know, somewhere at a neighborhood park sometimes, right? They're in all types of situations. And so the mobility behind the access is critical. So number one, asking the question, who has internet at home, did not really fulfill, you know, what the need was. And number two, now that we're in a position where we're shifting from reactionary to back to our data-driven decision-making, how do we do that without abandoning the efficiencies created by the pandemic, right? Because there were so many efficiencies. Like I closed on a house and no one ever saw me in real life. It was an amazing experience. I didn't have to drive anywhere. You know, that was unheard of prior to that. A lot of things that we were able to automate that we said we could never do. You know, you can never, you know, take your college pre-AP exams online. No, it compromises the integrity of what the system is here to do.
Can't see a doctor virtually clearly, right?
Right. Now all of a sudden we're taking them all online. So a lot of the question becomes now, we're going to tell you who needs the internet, right? And how do you do that? Now you associate that connectivity to all of the different outcomes that you're seeking to drive. So now you're saying, hey, if you're struggling with attendance, achievement, if you're struggling with building literacy at the elementary level, if you're enrolled in STEM courses, if at the high school level you're in credit recovery, pre-AP, AP, if you're involved in NCAA, UIL, you know, our ag stuff, right? Like those are the areas that we want to make sure that we're intensely focused and providing opportunities for connectivity. And not only are we doing that, but we're also aligning the connectivity to the software programs and all the other opportunities that we have available for our kiddos, right? And so you think about connectivity right now, as of 2021, the national average for per pupil funding is around $15,000. Mm-hmm. It's the highest it's ever been because of course, this infusion of federal funding. At the larger school districts, Title I, sometimes it's even higher than that. But you think about providing connectivity for a student, and it's maybe $100 a year.
Right.
In comparison to that, and it can drive, 80% of all the amazing things that we've actually pushed our instructors to have to learn to know how to do over the last couple of years. So we're in a very special position it is a matter of creating a priority structure around connectivity that then incites the adoption of that connectivity. Because we can create the priority structure, but if we don't have the institutional community and student buy-in for using those devices and using that critical connectivity, now we just have a bunch of devices that either are or aren't in the hands of students and have zero usage. And that is a pain point that we're seeing all over the country as well.
You know, you just touched on so many things there. I want to go back to just one of them and talk about, you know, reaching the students who most need the internet, right? And experiences you saw, which we also saw, which is in a pandemic, you can't just go ask people by an email if you need the internet or put it on your website, because they don't have access, right? And so that led to some deeper thinking on our side about who comes first, right? When we talk about access, is it the ones that we can most easily reach? Or is it the ones that are hardest to reach? Is it the student that's a refugee that may not even speak the language, right? And finding those voices, those people, when it's hardest.
Yeah. Well, you know, I sit on New York City's United Way Equity Council, their Equity Cabinet, I'm sorry. And one of the things that we are talking about right now is the refugee situation and how we solve for digital equity there. I do want to make sure as I answer that question, I take it back just a little bit.
Sure.
Because a lot of what I've seen across the country is that now we have a community of stakeholders that want to be involved in the solve. So if you're seeing the RFPs that are coming out, if you're seeing, you know, all of the different inquiries, whether it's an RFI or just a mayor coming out and saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do, who can come out and help us? Now cities, counties, and state leaders are trying to solve something. And what I really work to do is to create a network of community partners that can help to solve that. And I say that piece, that network is so critical, because when you provide connectivity to a student, you're not only connecting that student, you're providing connectivity to an ecosystem that drives student success and drives community success. So that ecosystem includes your school district, of course, right? And all the academic social resources that it includes. That ecosystem also includes community partners, so all the community-based organizations that work so hard to support our kiddos. It includes our government assistance programs and all of our transportation and food and housing, all of those amazing resources. And last but definitely not least, our industry partners, right? So the government piece includes telehealth and all that fun stuff, but the industry partners are all the businesses that sit and thrive within those communities, right? And really need that support as well. So providing the connectivity there, and this is what I try and help our city, state, and county leaders to really understand at the core of what they're trying to solve. When you're solving this, you're solving something full circle, right? And if you can identify it that way, now you can say, hey, CBOs, community-based organizations, right? I want you to be a part of a task force that will be responsible for helping us to distribute these devices for the goal of serving your mission. And now the outcome reporting is attached to each one of those organizations in a way that is super meaningful for them. For example, if one of the CBOs is responsible for housing and homelessness, right? Their goal and what they're trying to have as an outcome component would be tied directly to housing. So through this connectivity, through providing these digital inclusion resources, we are seeking to increase housing placement by 3%, right? Or by 4%. And that is the outcome that we have in mind at the very start of these programs. And we do that in every single industry for those CBOs as a part of a task force approach to solving for digital equity.
You mentioned the task force more than once when we were kind of coming up to this conversation. I think it's worth going deeper into that, because not only are you showing how that works in communities and community-based organizations, government models, and so forth, but this is an approach you took within T-Mobile to build the program to the level of success that it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It you know, and that's something that's been really important for us. We started off with that task force approach with Harris County Public Libraries. We connected 30,000 patrons in the first kind of swing of that. And, it's not easy when you're staring down 30,000 devices and saying, okay, I'm going to commit to the federal government that we need these, because I know we need this times 10, right, across these populations. But how am I going to get them out? And that's exactly what we did in Harris County. And we continue to replicate that across the country. So when you see New York City Department of Education having distributed almost 600,000, connected iPads across the community, that didn't happen with just the department, right? That happened because we were able to really structure it in a way where it aligned with all these different partners and created a task force to solve something for kiddos and for the communities that serve them.
That's amazing. So that's, another thing that we take as a basis for N50 is that as we begin with the community conversation, and while we see commonalities from community to community, we assume nothing when we go into one, because we're almost always surprised at what a community will tell us is important to them. Right.
So true. Yeah, planning with the mayor of St. Louis looks very different than planning with, the commissioner, Superintendent Thurman in California, right? Like, it's totally different conversations everywhere we go. I'm just so blessed to be able to sit at the table and be invited into those conversations. And that was something we talked about also, Kevin. And I don't know if I'm jumping ahead here, but
go ahead.
Yeah, if there are any, I'm sure there are plenty of company leaders and folks on the call that make decisions about your team and the structure of your team in order to impact industry. And I can tell you, it's highly critical that if there's an opportunity for you to bring in a leader from industry that really understands not only the population you're serving, but the business implications of driving success throughout those industries, it's critical that you consider bringing someone like that in. And I'm not saying that because I'm looking for another company to go to. I love my work every day. But I know the impact that I've had on our education success and being able to really structure a program that speaks to the communities that we're seeking to serve. And that makes a tremendous difference anytime you're looking at, who's going to lead these projects. And not only bringing them into the company to get their, to kind of milk their brain, but also to allow them to have a voice in which direction you go, right? Because it doesn't matter if you're not going to listen to the person. So I think that piece is highly, critical too, not just in education, but with regard to first responders, with regard to transportation, aviation, all these other industries that are, that our companies seek to speak to.
Well, let's pull that apart a little bit, because one of the things we wanted to get to with the title of the whole session was concept to reality. And I think this is really super important for our N50 partners who are here, because none of them are in the same position as any other, right? Some are what they would consider farther along or in early stages of ESG work or digital equity work, and are looking for inspiration, looking for strategies that work well, that they can transplant into their thought processes where they go. And T-Mobile just happens to have, one that's fairly far down the line in terms of having started it, having operated, having data around it, and seeing how this is not simply philanthropic, right? This is part of the business, right? So if you would, like, back all the way up, concept, right, and how we get to reality, these numbers you're talking about, where millions of people are impacted and billions of dollars are invested, and that's healthy for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it didn't start off with us jumping from, a few thousand kids connected to millions.
Right.
It definitely started off with building relationships across the education space. And that was highly important, right? So when I initially came into the company, I had to ask myself, what spaces do I need to be positioned in to ensure that people even know T-Mobile wants to be a part of this education space, right? What does that need to look like? And so looking at, the billions of dollars being spent on education software programs at the time, and, over 60% of the licenses not being used, right? Looking at all of the money being spent on, Google Chrome and really integrating that into the education space and what that looks like. Looking at all the school districts that are seeking to have additional opportunities for students to be engaged in virtual school programs. Also the significant increase in learning management system adoption was happening at that time. And this is pre-pandemic is what I'm talking about right now. So, there were some significant advances and changes that were happening. There were a lot of ed tech and technology leaders like you and I that were, really trying to push an agenda throughout our school districts and work really hard with our leadership teams to say, hey, this really makes sense. And let me talk to you about why, right? And really trying to get that alignment and the funding in order to create a full circle solution around how we think about curriculum and technology. There's a saying that I always say, and it's curriculum is the foundation, pedagogy is the method, and technology is the support, right? And so what the pandemic forced us to do is flip that on its head, which, it sounded nice in the beginning, but that's what speaks to the adoption question that John has in the chat over here, right? When you put technology as the foundation, unfortunately, you don't have the structures in place in order to have the adoption needed to keep that technology as the foundation. So the foundation has to be the supporting factor that layers on top of everything that's critically important, right? So that it can be adopted in a way that is sustainable and scalable across our school systems and across our communities. And that's where we see such a huge adoption gap. So we started off, of course, with these tens of thousands of students, transition into what spaces do we need to sit in? Where do we need to be? How do we need to be involved across the education community as a whole? We did that from a government and policy perspective, heavily involved in, FCC commenting and working, across the Hill. And that's why I brought in Dr. Jeff Carlson, who, is heavily involved in out of the DC area. We have our federal teams and our government affairs teams. And we were also at kind of this weird place of acquiring Sprint.
It's true. That was a big factor.
It kind of was a big thing. And that happened at the start of the pandemic as well. So the pandemic happened in March. I think we officially initiated a merger in April. We launched Project 10 Million in September, which we were already at millions of students connected before we launched Project 10 Million, which is another thing that makes it so exciting. No one can say, oh, T-Mobile did this free thing because they wanted to capitalize on the pandemic because they didn't have a lot of kids connected. No, we had a ton of kids connected already. And we still launched a free program all over the country, right? Understanding that it was super complementary to all the other things that we were seeking to do. Because in all reality, yes, there's funding available, but there are still a lot of kiddos that may not be covered by that funding. There are a lot of school districts that couldn't even afford, an ECF consultant to be able to apply for ECF funding and didn't understand that process at all, right? And so all of those variables were a part of being able to get to where we are today. Very, very heavy on, engaging with our mayors and governors and state superintendents, commissioners, broadband commissioners, right? And just sitting in front of them every opportunity we got and being a source for information, not a source for here's what you need to do, but a source for no matter who you decide to work with, right? No matter who your intended partner is, we're here as a strategy consultant for you, right? To help you to align yourself to what's best with your students. And I think having that approach and me going home in the evenings and saying, you know what, I want to build out a presentation for this particular city, right? That is not specific to T-Mobile, but it's specific to solving the problem that they're seeking to solve. That's the part that establishes the trust and creates a long-term opportunity to sustain a relationship. So that's really how we got to where we are today. It's all relationships.
Well, there's a little more than that, right? I mean, there was, so you make a great point about being sort of in position when the emergency happened, right? Clearly, you were well positioned for that, having already been doing this for years and already having millions connected, but your organization was also able to react quickly, right? And
Yeah,
not
the
just
supply
say, here's
chain.
how we do it. It's like, no, here's now how we need to do it, right?
Yeah, not just how we need to do it, but here's how we've already prepared. Now, keep in mind, Project 10 Million was launching in September. So we had already prepared from a supply chain perspective for that launch, not knowing that a pandemic was even going to happen. So while, so many places weren't equipped with the supply to be able to meet this crazy demand during a critical time in our country, we had already ramped up and understood the challenge behind the digital divide. And we knew that we were going to commit to solving that challenge, for the country. And we had already pre-spent, probably, I would say, probably at least $1 billion or something on all of this hardware in preparation for solving the digital divide. And so we were well positioned to speak to a lot of what, ended up happening throughout the pandemic. And that made a huge difference as well.
Yeah. There's a couple things within what you were talking about that I think are worth telling a little more story around. One is that the program itself is more than a hotspot, right? Even though that may be the thing it's most well known for is here's a hotspot, here's data, right? So it's more than a hotspot. And the other is that that hotspot is still the epicenter of so many things. And while this began focused in education, focused in schools, we learned, if we didn't already know, that education was maybe the third or fourth most important thing that these were being used for during a crisis, right?
Yeah.
Education, financial stability, finding out where food was, all these things were actually somewhat more important than simply keeping kids connected to I'm going to say a legacy school system, right? That was still trying to do the same things in the same way, but through a small pipe, right?
I'm going to tell you, how many parents we had that, had to share a student's device or student's connectivity in order to stay connected to their own workplace so that they didn't lose their employment. We had so many situations where, even with parents being able to communicate with their students while they were essential workers, their babies were at home. A lot of time they were at home unsupervised. And the parents were able to use that connectivity to stay connected to their kiddos because maybe they couldn't afford an extra cell phone at the time, right? And so there are so many different scenarios. And I remember, we got a couple of months into the pandemic and I was on a conference call and I probably, sometimes I have to tell myself, should you be quiet or not? They were kind of excited on this conference call saying CVS cases are down and, it's because kids are, it's because kids are home and they're safe. And I said, no, CPS cases are down because kids are not sitting in front of teachers right now. Teachers that can look at them and say, and look them in the eye and say, hey, you're not okay. Like, how is everything okay? Right? Schools have been a safe place for as long as we can ever think of. And so that's why on the flip side of us changing the technology to the core, we lost a little bit there, right? And being able to keep ourselves truly connected to teaching, learning, and inspiring youth, and really being a safe place for youth. And so we have to be able to flip that around now, but still have that technology integrated into every layer of what we're seeking to do here.
So let's see if we can look over the chat for a second. We have one question here that's fairly direct. It says, we see the escalating number of state, county, and municipal RFPs for digital inclusivity. Is there a role for N50 and partners to bring time and talent to address these needs?
You know what? I asked myself that because I'm working with a few county administrators and a couple of mayors across the country just on, because they have these RFPs out right now. And so I've put together a plan for the consultants that they're seeking to hire to say, hey, based on what I've talked to the mayor about, here's where you can start, right? I can tell you, we can definitely do this work. Like, we can definitely step into these RFPs and have a full circle solution and create amazing blueprints for every city, state, and county with the learnings we have over the last several years and the expertise that comes from this group, we absolutely can do that. I think the issue is the bandwidth, right? And so the reason that I don't personally say, you know what, I can do all the things that are in this RFP, we got this, is because there has to be a collective consideration for just the bandwidth around making that type of commitment in so many different places.
The human bandwidth, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just the human capital bandwidth.
Yeah.
You know, and so I do come in and I sit with, you know, these leaders, and honestly, it is not respective of what company they choose to work with. You know, it is truly in the essence of, I want to help you solve this, and I've done it so much that you can talk to me for, you know, an hour, and I can put together a whole plan of what your steps probably should be and the other stakeholders you need to bring into the conversation. And so I just take it upon myself to do that great work for them. But I definitely think if we were to think about, you know, potentially responding to some of these RFPs as an organization, as a collective, you know, body of professionals, it would be an absolutely amazing thing.
Well, we're always looking for a couple of things, right? One is there a way to do it once and create a model, at least, you know, a first 80% of a model that can be replicated? Because, you know, even this grand group can't go to all the cities, right? And can't do all the work. But can we find the exemplars? Can we find a good one, right, to go and then see it and see how we can take that? And the second thing we look for is, how is what we're learning here, whether it be in rural Texas or it be in Chicago or it be in the schools, how is this applicable in other countries? Because we're global, right? So how can we do the right things we learned and skip the wrong things that we learned along the way for this? So I think that we would love to explore the possibility of finding you know, one of these city, county, municipal RFPs and saying, look what the industry can do together, because better together, right? May not even be possible apart, but better together for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think, you know, from what I've seen, there are certain components that are, you know, from a top line perspective, there are certain components that are applicable no matter where we go. It's just a matter of transitioning the language around that specifically to who we're talking to, right? So, you know, from a global perspective, you have different, you know, network infrastructure considerations and, you know, potential partners around even providing the access and that type of thing that you want to make sure that you're thinking about. You have different considerations around literacy, and even making sure that you know, you're solving for exactly what those communities need. I have this example that I reference quite a bit, and it's, you know, coming from a child in an underrepresented situation, there are times when people want to come in and solve something for you because they're looking from the outside looking in, and they think they know what the problem is. I'm looking at this community and surely they're hungry. So I'm going to go buy them 10,000 meals, and, you know, and then I'm going to show up with those meals, and here's where I'm going to go to show up with the meals. And those community members are going to come over here and they're going to get these meals. And I show up with 10,000 meals and 2,000 people show up. And from my limited point of view, as someone who's not a part of those communities, I conclude that 8,000 families don't need meals, right?
Right.
As opposed to coming from those populations and really being able to kind of step foot in there, even if you're not from there, being able to really step foot in there as an advocate,
right,
and take a little bit of time to truly assess the needs and have the critical conversations and understand, wow, there is a food insecurity, but that food insecurity is second to the transportation insecurity. And no one would ever be able to come and get these meals because they don't have a way to come and get them, or perhaps I'm not positioned in the right places. The same thing happens with adoption, right? And I want to relate that to, you know, just devices in general. We're providing the devices. We think we know what the communities need. We show up with the devices, 2,000 people come to get them, and we conclude, well, the other 8,000 don't need them. Schools are doing this all over the country. And I don't want to say that it's a reflection of affluent leadership, but it is definitely a reflection of affluent and hierarchical structures of how we have always try to solve for underrepresented communities. And there is a better way to do that. And the better way to do it is to make sure that you're stepping on the inside and you're asking the key questions to find out what really do we need to solve. And then we're creating collective opportunities to solve these things in tandem with one another. And that's just, I think as we approach any city, state, or county RFP opportunity or an opportunity to help them solve for something, it has to be seen in that way. We're going to find ourselves on the other end of advising a huge purchase that costs them millions and millions of dollars that doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Kiesha, this isn't something we talked about in advance, so this is going to come out of the blue a little bit.
I'm sorry, kick me off the call if you need to.
No. You're taking us in interesting directions, which is wonderful. That's much better this way. But sometimes we talk to organizations and finding out how they want to engage to help sometimes takes us down a path where they say, we really want our team members to be involved. Our team members want to be involved, right? So what can they do in a community besides just, contributing when there's a fire or something like that, contributing money when there's a fire? How can they be part of that community inspired learning?
Yeah.
Is T-Mobile doing anything in this realm?
You know what? I think the biggest thing is, not when you want to impact communities, you can't make top-down decisions the way that you do from a business perspective. I understand, like, when from a business perspective, you're just able to sit in a boardroom and sit at a table and design something and then say, here's what we're going to do.
Right.
You leave out of the room and you make it happen. In this type of situation, every stakeholder that wants to be a part of the project really needs to have a voice in what happens with that project, because generally those voices will guide you to ensure that the way that you're deploying is a way that truly speaks to the populations you're seeking to serve. And that's a huge difference in how you have to think about creating a team of people and being able to engage larger parts of the organization in solving a problem like this.
That's cool. So let's shift gears for a second, and it's a great chance to remind people to throw questions out. In fact, there comes a question right as I said that. It's almost on cue. How important has digital literacy been in Project 10 Million, and how does T-Mobile address this in communities? And I know this is interesting because it's coming from across the pond over in London. So very interested to hear this answer.
I love it. And John, maybe you can at some point type in chat an alternative for digital literacy, because I've been struggling with that term lately because it implies that people are illiterate. So, and I don't, maybe it doesn't, it's probably just me in my head. But I want an opportunity to create more, or to provide more access to digital resources that really matter. I love some of the work that Common Sense Media has done in helping to guide parents to understand, what content it really makes sense for their kiddos, and they can help them to make some really smart decisions and have some key conversations around, what they're watching and what they have access to. But I think it's going to take a full circle community approach to being able to solve for some of that. Now, what T-Mobile has done, the thing that I love when I'm going out to plan with large agencies is, again, I have to go back to the task force model, because the agencies are not the ones that know the community. And when I say agencies, I'm talking about like your mayor, your county, folks, your county administrators, they don't know the populations. They know about the populations. They want to solve for the populations, but the CBOs know the populations. They're the ones who have Johnny walking in to that homeless shelter every day that's telling them how his day went and the obstacles he faced, right? So those CBOs, they know. So when we think about solving for this digital literacy thing, somebody in this group has a different word for me, but I'm going to figure it out. We have to create.
We'll see the chat box light up here in a minute.
I know. We got to create something, guys. We're going to work on this together anyway. So we might as well start with a new term for digital literacy, directly from the N50 group. But when we start thinking about, how we want to think about digital literacy, it generally has to come through those CBOs. So the way that I have it as a part of my blueprint that I customize when I'm working with different places is really training up the CBO leaders to transition that knowledge on to the folks that they work with every single day. Otherwise, they're just going to be handing out devices that, that don't really get used the way that they really could be. An example of that is, so we provide all of the connectivity for the Veterans Association across the country.
Okay.
Right. So that means every veteran that goes into a VA that wants, access to telehealth or, something like that,
I didn't know this.
They can get a connected iPad, and they can walk out of there empowered to be able to connect to their medical community and all the people that are there to support them. Right. In providing connectivity through a lot of the public libraries across the country, we've put what's called a CPR3 program on their devices. So those devices already have all of the apps they have a suite of apps for housing solutions in the community. They have a suite of apps for food insecurity solutions in the community, for, transportation solutions, and the list goes on, academic, adult education solutions, solutions for the elderly population and the workforce solutions. So all of that actually already lives on the device before we even pass it out to a patron. In addition to training resources, in addition to a full directory of phone numbers for, key departments and places that they need to reach specific to those communities, right? And so that is a key part of digital literacy as well. If you already have the device is just a device, but what tools need to be on that device before you even put it in the hands of someone to make sure that they are empowered in a very novice way to interact with resources that matter to them. And you cannot do that unless you do some backwards programming. So if I'm sitting in the mayor's office designing what those programs are, who those contacts are, I'm missing the mark. Yeah. Because the people in those CBOs and that are actually working with those patrons, they know exactly what programs the patrons need. The same thing with designing now with the United Way and the work that we're doing across 200 organizations in New York City for refugee support, right? They have a lot of legal needs. They have a lot of, homeless needs. They have a lot of public safety needs. And some of those needs are conflicting because of all the politics that exist and all the other, crazy stuff. You have to be able to create cohesive systems for digital inclusion that speak to the communities you're seeking to serve. And then digital literacy becomes a much smaller issue, right? Because now you have the applications that are very specific to those populations.
So digital literacy obviously is not the right term, but we're using it as a placeholder today. So just
only because I said, right?
Just a big asterisk there by that.
Who am I, Kevin? Honestly, guys, if digital literacy makes you happy, like keep using it. I just personally want to change my own vocabulary.
Well, we go through this a lot. We used to talk about students as English language learners, and now we speak of them as emerging bilinguals, right? It's a shift from deficit thinking, right? In some ways, yeah. And also digital literacy can be easy to not understand the depth and the breadth of what's included under that umbrella when people refer to it. So
you're right.
I guess I might say like
underrepresented youth to opportunity youth to thinking about the language that we use, and I'm guilty too because I use all types of vocabulary, but I think
we constantly learn and correct, right? When you know better, do better, right? But I'm thinking like we spend a fair amount of time with students. I'm thinking students as opposed to kiddos in this case, because we're talking about student drivers, right? Student drivers get a fair amount of education, learning how to drive a car. That might extend to how to repair the car, but technology is not the same, right? It's because that technology ends up being a big part of what they do after they drive somewhere, right? If I'm carrying the metaphor around, how do I use this to get a job, right? How do I use this car to get a job? It doesn't fall under student driving, right? It's like citizenship. It's like it's much more beyond that. And another thing that kind of is creeping into digital literacy more and more as an imperative is cybersecurity and the broad realm of cybersecurity, from just good digital hygiene to not even knowing what threats are out there, what they could be, getting into. What are you seeing in terms of schools and communities in terms of where they're positioning cybersecurity as part of digital literacy? I'm using these placeholder terms again, but how early is that being introduced, and how well is that being introduced?
Honest answer.
Oh, please. This is family here.
I know that large tech companies have made it a major priority. I know that we've done, just a tremendous amount of work in ensuring that it is top of mind for everything we're seeking to do. We have C-level representation specific to cybersecurity and privacy and all those amazing things. In schools, what's been really difficult is just this pathway of trying to figure out what is forward progression for the school district, right? Forward progression for some school districts looked like, we are not going to spend another dollar on connecting kids. We're going to bring our devices back in, and kids aren't going to take a device home. And, that's what forward progression looks like for some school districts. And we are going to, 100% buckle down on academics and make sure that kids are passing their state standardized assessments and that they are actually making it to school, and then there are other school districts that are saying, we want to make sure we're 100% kiddos taking devices home, and, they are connected at all times, and there's not a lapse in that. And we want a sustainable system around what that looks like. And we want the core of our curriculum and our teaching and learning to, leverage these amazing digital platforms, because we want our kids to be ready for a 21st century, future. I think that we're just in a very peculiar place, Kevin, because we have so many school district leaders that are going the first path, right? And there's not an emphasis on cybersecurity when there's not a value structure around connectivity and digital equity and providing the access.
And technology is an innovation path.
Exactly.
Yeah, changes.
If you think about it, 65% of our future workforce, our opportunity youth, our underrepresented, marginalized populations,
right,
will not have access to those careers, because those careers are rooted and grounded in innovative technology. And the longer we have, folks in position that are not incorporating the full essence of their teams, all the way down to community members, to community, all those stakeholders, to student voices, to teachers, to your cafeteria staff, who are often, the essential folks in the school district who are often a part of those communities.
Mm-hmm.
Until you're really sitting and listening to those needs, and integrating those needs into the strategic plan, right? A strategic plan should not be built in a boardroom.
Right.
But that's still what takes place. Until that change happens, we're really in a position where we're looking at digital equity through a lens of what we think is the right thing to do, as opposed to what these communities have shown us and what they're ready to tell us that we need to.
I'm going to walk there with you a little bit. This is what keeps me up at night, right? Is that the things you talked about are embedded systemically and being replicated globally, and not in a way that I think really produces equity. So, my own experience drawing upon here is that, folks who are the absolute decision makers in school districts, which is your superintendent, your senior staff, and so forth, usually have, I'm going to say 20 to 30 years of experience in K-12. And a lot of that is pre-internet, right? And they learned in a way that was pre-internet, and they were rewarded for success in a way that was pre-internet. Tons of measurements and systems were set up around these things pre-internet. And we find our communities aren't even really asking for what we're giving them in schools, but we keep doing it, right? And if my favorite words are what if and so that, the three words I hate saying most is change is hard, right? But it just is. And and we saw this in the pandemic. We saw the rubber band of, okay, we'll do this because we have to. We're going to come right back with a vengeance to the way we were, right?
Yeah.
Because this is whatever you want to call it. This is the best practice. Well, it's the only practice you've ever done. So sure, it's the best practice. But, and this is the point I'm making for our N50 team globally, is that other countries are looking to what's happening in the US and saying, we want to get there. And I'm
Yeah.
saying, I'm not so sure. Right, you have an opportunity to do something completely different and of a quantum leap, an order of magnitude difference, if there's a different start to this, right?
Yeah.
I kind of want to avoid just the notion that if we put the internet in schools so that kids can view videos or view content that they couldn't otherwise get, that we're just going to end up replicating the same not great system. Right?
Yeah, it's so much bigger than that, right? It's about, kids having opportunities to be exposed to things that impact their academic vocabulary, that impact, how they view a test question and have the ability to answer it, right? You think about, this tremendous learning loss that we had throughout, this huge global pandemic across the country. Well, think about the implications of that, like, and how students are now going to be disproportionately labeled as special education because they are now falling behind and they don't have the aptitude to get caught up without one-on-one intervention, right? There are so many other layers
Right.
of where we are from a curricular perspective that, it is going to take all of us to really sit down and try to figure this out. And I love the idea, and I can't remember, I think it was John, and I'm sorry I keep picking on you, John, about, oh no, it was David, about, how do we think about, from a team perspective, our ability to impact and influence this RFP, this influx of RFPs and RFIs that are coming out across the country. This is a very special position. And I think this is the reason that from a global perspective, folks want to be, where we are. It is a lot of the reason, because we do tend to sit back and say, okay, well, let's solicit for the folks who know how to do this work. I think the question is, do we have enough folks responding that know how to do the work, that know how to position the work in a way that really makes sense for, for everyone involved, right? And for the folks that we're trying to serve. And that's really the question. So if N50 does say, hey, we want to collaboratively put together a group of folks who can respond to these RFIs and RFPs, and we want to do that in a way that's very, very special and particular to the populations that we want to impact, it keeps us in a position of, we want to be like them, right? Because we're in a very special place, and I think we have an opportunity to influence it.
Yeah, we have, and I think we have an obligation to show the, the best path that we can forward, because, opportunities are emerging as villages in Africa get connected, or Indonesia, or as first world countries returning to connectivity, like Ukraine, to have a chance to transform. And I'd just like to see it done in the best way possible. Kiesha, can I ask you, I'm getting a ton of back channel comments and questions and so forth that this is going really well. You okay if we extend a little bit and go into a couple other topics for a few minutes?
I would love to. Unfortunately, I do have a hard stop, and I don't want to let my team down.
Okay.
But I can come back.
Well, we have so many other things to unpack. We'll definitely come back.
It's so good.
We have maybe 7 more minutes left, and there's a couple of areas I wanted to venture into if we could. I want to talk about data and measurement a little bit. And I also want to talk about disaster resilience. Do you have a preference for which one we do first?
Oh man, I'm a data fan.
So. All right, let's go data. So you talked about being very data informed at T-Mobile about your process, and then you talked about how you really had to sort of set that data aside, forming that process aside to deal with the pandemic, right? And yet you still have now come out of that pandemic, you have new data that's re-informing you. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Now our focus is really on adoption and empowering adoption. It's very different than it was initially. Initially, it was, oh my gosh, we have to solve this core issue of just students not having connectivity at all. Now it's a two-pronged. We want to solve for all the other folks who don't have that connectivity and all the pockets that were missed somehow And you know, by now, if they were missed, it's because there's just a real heavy systemic issue around providing access and providing resources to those folks.
Right.
And that can be coming from both sides, right? It can be coming from a lack of trust from the folks that we have not been able to reach, and it could be coming from a lack of structure that really seeks to learn about those populations from a systemic perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that side of the prong, and then we have the other side where there are places that have all these devices, and leadership has decided that digital in order to provide for digital equity, we have to sacrifice teachers in classrooms, right? And it's an either or for some of that traditional leadership structure, which really is our prevalent leadership structure across schools in the country.
It is.
Right. And so so we're battling that mindset. I think the hard thing is that when you're battling that mindset, one school district at a time, one leader at a time, one transitioning leadership team at a time, it's a lot of work. And so it makes it a lot easier when we're working at the state level, the city level, the county level, right? To be able to influence multiple school district structures at a time and to solve this from a community perspective. And so that's really where our focus has been, in trying to examine specific data around each school district when we have to engage by school district, and then by each city, county, and state when we're engaging at those levels.
Cool.
I hope that was specific enough.
It is. And there's some folks that I know in this session that are in those positions and listening very closely to what you have to say about addressing those. And I'm taken by, and I'm shift gears here a little bit. I'm taken by T-Mobile's fortune, right? Which is not luck. You were fortunate to be in position at the pandemic to do so much good and to help so much because of the advanced planning. We're thinking that same way when we talk to many organizations in N50 about, instead of disaster response, how can we shift this conversation real effectively to resiliency? And would love to think more with you about T-Mobile and disaster resiliency in areas where you're working already. Obviously, right here in the U.S., Puerto Rico is a top concern, as well as Florida. What can you share with us about what T-Mobile is doing in terms of disaster response and resiliency in those areas?
Well, there is this part of me that I can't separate the two as easily as there are some folks that are just dedicated to only that type of work, and they have a very clear separation between the two. For me, the response is a part of the resiliency, right?
Yes.
And so I think we create structures to be prepared to respond. And as we do that, we also create resilient, scalable, and sustainable structures in order to solve prevalent issues that we're privy to prior to an emergency response, right? And so I think we're in a special position to be able to do that. We have provided, a few 100,000 units of connectivity to I can't say which major organization right now.
That's okay.
But to a major organization to provide free service to refugees across the country. And so we're taking that approach. We also, have our parent company that is doing a lot of work in other areas globally. And so we have that taking place. I know, just me personally, I'm involved in a lot of really high level conversations to solve for this connectivity concern that's happening specifically across our refugee communities. And, specific to Puerto Rico, we have a whole team of folks there that are aligning. Our government affairs team is heavily involved. And we have been extremely responsive to, all of the asks that have come our way. So, as a company, I'm sure there are certain limitations. And for me, I don't sit in the seat of, our VP of corporate social responsibility or our VP of, government affairs and all these amazing talented people we have on our team that make those decisions. But I know that we are a very responsible company. who seeks to not only support the responsiveness, but also, the overall resiliency of the communities we're seeking to serve.
I love that. It was beautiful. And what a great way to wrap it up, in that disaster response is part of the resiliency, and the resiliency is part of the response. Yeah, you can't separate the two.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's Erin. Yay. I think she's here to tell us we have to stop talking for a minute, but gosh, I could carry this conversation on all day with you. So much.
I want all these great alternatives to digital literacy from the chat. Like, thank you guys.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to go back and rewatch this and learn a few things myself too, that the pearls of wisdom you dropped along the way.
Yeah.
Dr. King, very grateful for your time today. Thank you for all the great information, the transparency, the professional collaboration we continue, and looking forward to carrying on the conversations, what we do next.
Yeah, thank you. And I sincerely hope to connect with each of you on LinkedIn. Kevin, I know you mentioned, just our 400 shared connections. Hopefully this will be another, however many people are listening in.
That's true.
I'd love to connect with you there, or Twitter, or, wherever life leads us to cross paths. But, this is something I'm super passionate about. And I think most of you are too. When we're thinking about the solve, like, how can we come together and collectively do this? It doesn't mean that all our companies are going to jump up tomorrow and give, billions of dollars to contribute to it. But we have so much brain power to help our state and government leaders to figure it out. And let's utilize that brain power when they're seeking RFPs for a reason. And it's because they don't either have the human capital, or they don't have the skill set to understand how to solve this. And we do. So
amazing.
Let's help.
Amazing. Thank you again. We want to help you keep your promise to your team.
Yes.
We're grateful.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thank you, Dr. King.
Bye-bye.
Gosh, what an amazing